Welcome back, everyone, to the Executive Summit series on cybersecurity here with us today. I hope you had a good health break, and I hope you took away a lot from the first session. Like I had said earlier, there was a lot to think about and to digest, very thought-provoking and a lot of passion. And I do believe we will experience now the same passion and insights that we had the pleasure to listen to earlier. So let's then dive right away into today's panel discussion. And I would like to introduce now the panel moderator and have the great honor to introduce John de Boer, Senior Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy at BlackBerry. And BlackBerry is also a Cyber Right Now Council co-chair and partner on our council. And John will be moderating the panel together with TELUS, F12, GeoComply, and Cohere, and as well as the audience Q&A. So John, the floor is all yours, and those as well for the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulrike, and hello, everyone. Indeed, we have a very exciting panel today. I am very pleased and honored to be with you. So as Ulrike mentioned, my name is John de Boer. I work with BlackBerry. BlackBerry is a leader in cybersecurity, software, and services. We are pioneers in AI-driven cybersecurity and currently secure some 500 million devices worldwide, including 235 million cars on the road today. So we're a trusted supplier, vendor, thought leader, serving some of the most discerning clients and safety conscious clients around the world. So today we have a very exciting and interesting discussion. What I'm going to do is just set the scene initially, and then I'll turn over to introduce the panelists. And then we will engage in a very interactive discussion. After that, we'll have time, hopefully, for Q&A. Don't hesitate to submit your questions, and we'll be sure to tackle them. So in terms of the theme today, as you know, the cyber threat landscape is quickly evolving. It is more complex, more sophisticated than ever. In fact, the World Economic Forum ranked the threat of cybercrime as one of the most severe risks facing businesses, government, and people today. And as you heard earlier this morning, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity and also the Communications Security Establishment have called organized crime one of the most pervasive threats to Canadians, and almost certainly will pose a national security and economic security risk to our country. Now, the official data in terms of the impact of cybercrime in Canada is largely unknown. The National Cybercrime Coordination Center of the RCMP states that some $530 million worth of goods and services were stolen through cybercrime. But the reality is that that's just the tip of the iceberg. Most cyber attacks go unidentified and undeterred, and it's very difficult to understand the actual impact of these attacks on Canadians. The $530 million figure, in fact, according to the head of the National Cybercrime Coordination Center, is probably more realistically around $5 billion. And that doesn't take into account the disruption to businesses and services that we see around the world. Now, parliamentarians have been taking cybersecurity seriously. In fact, in June, the Standing Committee on National Defense published a report called the Cyber Defense of Canada. It made 37 recommendations, one of which was the need to establish minimum standards for cybersecurity for small and medium-sized businesses, and to provide small and medium-sized businesses with incentives to adopt the latest security measures. Now, this aligns with some of the advocacy that the Canadian Chamber's Cyber Right Now Council has been pushing for, which is to support Canadian small businesses and medium-sized businesses, in fact, businesses of all sizes, to invest in cybersecurity. However, many businesses face a conundrum. The cybersecurity threat landscape is increasing in scale and sophistication, becoming more pervasive than ever, and yet our budgets are shrinking. These are tough economic times. And so a core theme that we're going to be discussing with the panelists today is, how do we do more cybersecurity with less resources? How can we understand what to prioritize and focus on when it comes to cybersecurity that will give you a higher impact? What, for instance, are the most meaningful steps that decision makers can take to protect against cybersecurity? And we'll also dive into some of the latest trends. For example, does generative AI measurably change the cyber threat landscape? Or is generative AI a cybersecurity enabler or a disruptor, or both? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. We have 4 distinguished panelists today. First of all, from TELUS, Kim Schreader, the Director for Cybersecurity Professional Services. Welcome, Kim. From F12, we've got Chief Technology Officer Calvin Engen. Welcome, Calvin. From GeoComply, we have CISO Fabrice Renaud. And finally, we have from Cohere, the Director of Infrastructure and Security, Moulder. Welcome, everyone, to the panel.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Great. So I gave probably short thrift to your background and to your introduction. So I'd like to start off this panel by giving each of you the opportunity to briefly introduce yourselves, introduce your organizations, what you do, and then also say one thing about why cybersecurity is important to you and your organization. I'll start with you, Kim. Over to you.
Thank you. Very excited to be here and to be part of this panel. So thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I am the Director of Cybersecurity Professional Services for TELUS. TELUS is a large telecommunications company in Canada. So it's obviously a complex and critical infrastructure in its own right, but I'm also part of the team that helps secure Canadian businesses that are customers of TELUS. So we sometimes joke at TELUS that security is the little known thing people don't know that we do, but we actually have a team of over 500 security professionals. We protect more than 750 organizations. We have more than 2,100 managed security devices and endpoints. So we really are helping secure Canadian businesses of different sizes. You know, cybersecurity is important, and I'm sure it's going to be hard for us to come up with different reasons, but it's so important for us as customers, consumers, as people with families. I think that, you know, cybersecurity really touches all aspects of our lives and our customers' lives. And so for that, it makes it extremely important in our day-to-day.
Fantastic, thank you. And indeed, I mean, TELUS being a nationwide provider, you do touch many Canadians in many respects. So Calvin, over to you.
Thanks, John. So I'm Calvin Engen. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for F12, and we're a managed security service provider specializing in serving the small to medium enterprises across Canada. And so we really focus in on helping organizations with their day-to-day operational challenges, but help also elevate the standards that they can come to expect. The reason why I'm in cybersecurity, and really to highlight the gravity of our mission, is over my tenure, I've witnessed businesses crumble because of cyber incidences. Like businesses that had great aspirations and hardworking employees, and it's heartbreaking to watch not just the downfall of those businesses, but the livelihood of people be jeopardized. Families, communities, and those dreams disrupted just because of vulnerabilities and incidences in that space. And it's it's not just a technical issue. It's a deeply human issue. It's these experiences that we have that are just deeply personal to me because I've witnessed it firsthand. And so I'm committed to myself to ensuring that our, such a fate doesn't befall to our clients. And hence I've made it my mission to elevate the standard of what our clients can come and should expect in this industry, no different than the mandatory minimum standards that we've seen get published. And so at F12, we treat, essentially cybersecurity measures as not options, not add-ons. They are ingrained standard and non-optional in our agreements. And so for F12, we're not just another player in the cybersecurity arena. We are pioneering and leading the way in the small to medium enterprise space with that commitment to be unwavering. And so, with the ever-evolving cyber landscape, those threats mutate and increasingly sophistication of those attacks are happening on a daily basis. And so we want to ensure that our clients have the best defenses and, more importantly, the knowledge to navigate these complex domains. So I look forward to our discussions today, and turn it back to you, John.
Thank you, Calvin. Indeed, the human dimension is so important. You touched on the idea that this is not just something that happens out there in cyberspace. It's real, right? It has real impact. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn to you, Autumn. Over to you. Introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you. Autumn Moulder. So as you mentioned, the Director of Infrastructure and Security at Cohere. We are a Canadian startup in the generative AI space. So we build foundational models, both generative and representational models. And as you mentioned, John, there are a lot of questions these days about, does generative AI, do LLMs, does AI at all change the cybersecurity landscape, how we approach threats? So I'm here to represent that perspective. Security is a massive concern for us at Cohere with how we build models. We focus on the enterprise space. And so we have kind of a unique perspective on how cybersecurity is going to evolve. What are the immediate threats that companies need to face and pay attention to when it comes to integrating AI into their daily workflow? And I'm sure we'll touch on and talk about some of those things during the panel. But as I said, it's a new world, and there's different ways in which I think you need to approach and think about security. But there's a lot of things that are it's the same problems. You just need to think about them in a slightly different way. So
indeed. Well, thank you so much. And we're so excited about here in Canada about Cohere's emergence and development. BlackBerry was delighted to, together with Cohere, to be one of the first to sign the Canadian Code of Conduct on the responsible use and development of generative AI. And of course, as you said, there's a lot of unknowns there, but many of the issues also go back to basics, right? In terms of basic security. So we look forward to learning from you and hearing more about some of the exciting work that you're doing. Fabrice, I want to turn it over to you. Tell us about GeoComply, yourself, and where cybersecurity fits into this.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. So I'm Fabrice. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at GeoComply. GeoComply primarily provides compliance and fraud detection. Most of our customers today are based in the US, but we have some in Canada and Europe as well. Our customers vertical are in online sports betting, online streaming services, and fintech. So if recently you tried to use a VPN to access your favorite streaming services and you couldn't do it, that could be thanks to us in a way. So same thing if you try to place a bet out of state in the US, like that's where we come in. I've been with GeoComply for 3 years now. I've been in tech for over 20. I got into security through the compliance route. I've done a ton of roles. I worked in sales, I worked in QA, I've done project management, I've managed software development projects, I worked in IT. And my career path took me into security, and that really created that raised a passion for me. Like I've been fairly passionate about security now for like close to 10 years. What gets me going the most is actually helping people understanding the risk. Today, when you hear about security and especially IT, there is a lot about technical controls. We're talking about all those systems, all of those vendors you have to implement to be secure. But then when you read about cyber attacks, more often than not, and I think Deloitte was published a report a couple of years ago that was saying that something like 88% of all cyber attacks were caused or enabled through some human mistake somewhere. So implementing controls is important, but making sure your people understand what's going on the risk is even more important. So hopefully I get a chance to talk a bit more on the people side of things. That's going to be my thing.
Fantastic. No, and like you said, technology, people, process, I think we're going to be talking a lot about that. But what I take away from your initial introduction is trust is so important, right? And there are so many different transactions that we're taking on a daily basis, hourly basis, right, on the internet. And so companies like yourselves behind that is really important. So let's jump right into the discussion. And the first, question I want to ask is, how do each of you see the threat landscape when it comes to cybersecurity evolving here in Canada? And you can obviously speak to some of your customer base as well, but give us a sense of what you're seeing, how that's evolving, where you think it's headed. And I'll start with you, Kim.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest evolutions over the last couple of years has obviously, nobody wants to say that word COVID again, but that really quickly made remote work something that we had to contend with, and it changed how a lot of organizations had to do business. So it wasn't just about, oh my goodness, I need to now secure remotely working, but some entire businesses, particularly in the small to medium business, they had to actually shift how they did everything. So what that did, as far as adding complexities, in addition to securing a mobile workforce, is that we've really seen an increase in the supply chain attacks. So as you've had to shift your business and you've had to think of creative ways to reach your customers differently than you maybe did before, particularly if you had like brick and mortar, or you had services that people could interact face to face, and there's an evolution that included maybe adding mobile apps and the ability to go to other markets that you didn't have before. So while there was opportunity, it did mean that there was a larger supply chain surface. And I think for me, that's one of the things that I've really seen and noticed, is that, you talk about third-party risk management, fourth-party risk management, how far do you want to go? But those supply chains have really become far more complex in the last couple of years. And so I think that's somewhere that I've really seen an evolution in the threat landscape.
That's so true. I mean, we hardly realized before COVID, as you mentioned, that the number and variety of applications that we depend upon on a daily basis, right, for work, and even more after COVID, after you go beyond the corporate network wall. So that supply chain integrity assurance is really important, and a difficult thing to secure, but extremely important, as you noted. So Calvin, over to you. What's your perspective on this?
Sure, John. Well, the threat landscape is certainly not what it was a decade ago, or in fact, a year ago. The pace of which it's evolving is, both fascinating, but quite frankly, alarming. So, the current state, as I perceive it, is one of flux. Traditional perimeter-based security is no longer enough, just based on the workforce and where they are. Threats are everywhere, from our email boxes to our smart home devices. We're seeing that uptake in ransomware attacks, targeting not just the big corporations that are reporting it, but all across the small to medium businesses across Canada, schools, hospitals, local governments. And, certainly the attack method is still phishing attempts. That's one of the primary ways. And so those techniques, though, are becoming more sophisticated. We're seeing deepfake technology and artificial intelligence driven tactics to craft these very, very cunning emails. And so you couple that with the Internet of Things devices, that everything in your home is smartly connected, but not secure by design. And so many of us continue to rely on this, and we're seeing those same technologies being leveraged in businesses, and there's not enough of awareness around that. So that brings a whole slew of new vulnerabilities to the landscape. And so when I think about businesses, these threats just mean real financial losses, reputational damages, and legal ramifications. And so while I look at all of this, I still think there's hope, but I'm cautiously optimistic because it's not all doom and gloom. Knowledge is power. And so understanding these threats is the first step in combating them. So I look forward to talking a little bit about that a little bit later.
I echo your hopeful message, and you talked about it, and sort of Fabrice, about the human element in this, right? Both in terms of as a vector, right, entry point for potential cyber attacks, but also as a defender, right? And here raising the awareness level, right? Providing people with know-how could potentially move us toward a much more secure environment. So I think that's obviously your work, that's BlackBerry's work, many of our work. So thank you for that. Autumn, over to you. What's your perspective on the threat landscape? How do you see it evolving? Look forward to hearing your perspective on this in particular.
Yeah, thank you, John. As as I mentioned, we're an AI startup, so obviously my responses are going to be colored by that. And I do think things are evolving. I think there was a question dropped in the chat about how, as we're using AI, and this might become a useful weapon against, right, to defend, but it's also going to become a useful weapon to attack. There's a great quote out there from an individual Daniel Meisler. He runs a blog called Unsupervised Learning, was at Apple, started a new company focused on like AI security. Anyways, there's a really great quote that he's got that says, natural language is the primary means of attack for large language models, and it can be used to attack systems. So there was a really interesting scenario a few months ago where a researcher went out and was able to attack a well-known provider where they used essentially a confused deputy attack, where the LLM was connected to someone's email through a plugin. And because the LLM was able to summarize a website, you basically trick an individual to summarize a compromised website. And the researcher, all they did was put some instructions in the HTML on the website that were directives to the language model. And it was just natural language. Any one of us could read it. It's not specialized code, and just caught the attention of the model and directed it to scroll over to the connected Gmail account and then exfiltrate data. So I think that's just the beginning and the early stages of what concerns many people, right? Like the way that people are going to use these tools to attack systems are going to look different than the way that what we've seen before. However, this is where we go back to a lot of the principles of how we defend against these things are similar. You use defense in depth. So if you're integrating AI, maybe try to keep things isolated from the external world, because that just adds a layer of protection for you. You treat input as untrusted. And there's a variety of techniques that are just we've known throughout as we've developed software and as we continue to do it, that we just need to apply in the same way as we're developing with this new technical layer. I love what you said, Kim, about supply chain being a major change that we've seen evolve. I think supply chain is one of the things that I'm particularly interested in and particularly focused on as a company working with models, because supply chain becomes a really complex topic once you start introducing the idea of training data sets that are then encoded into your model, which then can be, data can be exfiltrated or leaked, even if you're not talking to the original source, because you added that data into like fine-tuning your model or something like that. So supply chain, I think, is going to become one of the most critical aspects of security as we work with, integrate AI and LLMs into, the technical landscape as that evolves with enterprise.
Fascinating. And, obviously, as you noted, there are a lot of unknowns, right? And possible theoretical ways that that generative AI, large language models could be used maliciously. Have we seen that in actual fact, or is that still a theoretical issue?
I would say we have seen practical attacks. However, the tech is so early that it's just like when cloud was being developed, right? We don't know how things are going to evolve. That's not to say we shouldn't adopt it, right? Cloud has so many benefits and kind of, I know we've talked a lot as a panel about how we want to focus on immediate risks. How do you evaluate like the risk to true risk to your organization? What's the trade-off? So I think there's definitely research and practical attacks that exist today. But none of it is so bad that it should stop anyone from attempting to achieve the productivity gains that you get.
Absolutely. Fabrice, over to you. I mean, you're in a very exciting and interesting space. Many people read about the MGM, hack. What's your take on the cyber threat landscape? How are you reading this, and where do you see it headed?
So I tend to be a little bit of an optimist. So I like to think that today, with like government pushing like for mandating security for businesses, like we think like with the SEC in the US or like even in Canada, there is enough information today for like a company who wants to invest in security to be secure. Like you've got resources that are available today. Like we were talking about AI, you can actually go to ChatGPT, describe your company, say what you have, what you not you have. And it's actually going to do a fairly decent job at telling you what are the basic things you need to implement to keep your security secure. So if you want to secure your company, there's a way to do it. And I think what we're seeing, like some evolution in terms of the threat landscape, is attackers now more and more are faced with those companies who've got like good security controls in place. So they have to go, so of course they go around it, and that's what happened. You were mentioning AGM. That's exactly what happened with MGM. Like MGM had like security control in place, so they went the human way. It's not clear like how exactly it was done, but like by the sound of it, it was most likely a phone call to their IT department, pretending to be an employee, asking for a password or an MFA request. There was no human process to validate the identity of the user. Access was granted, and from there, you gain access to system. And that's where as well, where you're seeing an evolution, especially for those type of groups, where instead of downloading malware that's going to be detected by EDR, MDR, like name your acronym, your security acronym, they're actually like living off the land, and they're going to use tools that are commonly seen in those environments. So something like TeamViewer or like some remote desktop tool. And once they're in, they've got persistence, they know, and they're going to start scanning everything, and they just grab everything that way. So you've got on one side companies who invested millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands, depending on your size, to put all those tools and security controls in place. But then you just one phone call away, and someone in IT or another department not doing that due diligence to get hacked. So this is interesting. So right now for that MFA request, so something we're doing at GeoComply, and we implemented straight away when we saw what happened. Anytime an employee now is going to ask for a password or an MFA request, we are going to require a Zoom call. Like get on Zoom, we're going to verify you're really who you are. But talking about AI and deepfakes, that's only going to last for so long. Like we only need to start thinking about the next phase, because anyone that's going to be a bit public facing, some YouTube video, you're going to be able to generate some deep fake and get on the Zoom and pretending to be someone you're not, or even like on a phone call. If you can say, oh, I can't, you know my voice, but I can't get on the video, but you know my voice. It's easy to contact someone on LinkedIn with like a very generous offer for a new job, get them doing a job interview, record their voice, and now use that to, or no, some other pretense, and then use that to generate. So it's an interesting place where like technical controls are getting stronger and stronger, but at the same time, AI is going to help make social engineering so much more convincing. Calvin was talking about phishing. That's another place where AI is going to be very strong. Feed AI, like your LinkedIn profile, your Facebook, like knowing what you like, what conference you went to, and get the AI to generate a phishing email based on that. They're going to become very, very convincing. Like we're going to go away from the one size fits them all, like spamming everyone in the company. Now they're going to be able to, attackers are going to be able to target a company and have like one custom phishing email per employee based on information they gathered on the internet. So the threat is definitely evolving, and it's going to keep evolving. And for us in defense, the most important thing we can do today is just like keeping track of what's going on and how things are evolving. The worst thing a security team can do today is just say, hey, I've implemented the NIST CSF or some type of framework. We are done. We're just going to look at the alerts, because that's going to come back to bite you.
Yeah, I know it's a fast evolving landscape, as you noted. Both sides are innovating, right? Both the attackers and the defenders. BlackBerry's investing significant amounts of money in our technology, particularly AI-driven technology, so that we can be more predictive, right? Preventive. But one aspect is the technology. The other aspect, obviously, is the process and people, which we've kind of started to focus on. Now, we've painted the landscape. It's highly complex. It's almost overwhelming, and just increasing in speed. I want to now turn, our attention to what can we do about this, right? At the end of the day, we need to be solutions oriented. Some of you have talked about optimism. So, Kim, over to you in terms of, what do you think are the most important and meaningful steps that the C-suite, IT decision makers can take to first evaluate the risks, right? The actual risks that are most important to them. And then secondly, protect their companies from those risks.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's right there in the question. You need to be able to evaluate what are the real risks to my organization. I think that often people have a reactive response sometimes, where they hear another organization in a similar field or a similar vertical has had some experience, and then they want to run and sort of protect themselves. But it could be a little bit painful at the beginning, because you want to be action oriented, but you don't have to run and do everything at once. What you need to do is understand, okay, like really, what are my critical assets? What are my biggest weaknesses? Where do I have data that would be most detrimental to my organization? And I think doing that, cybersecurity posture assessment to really understand, what do I have, where is it, and how is it currently secured? And then from there, building out a plan. You mentioned the doing more for less. We're in economic times, and particularly when you're talking about businesses that security isn't their number one priority. They are looking to be innovative and manufacture the coolest next thing, but they want to make sure that they're able to protect that IP that they have. It's secondary to them. It's important, but that's really not where they're focused. If we talk about hospitals, if we talk about it's not the primary reason that they're in business. So I think it's really good to just sort of take a pause, try not to be reactive, similar to what you'd say if someone was in an incident. Take a pause, take a look, let's take a little bit of an audit here of what's the reality of the organization and the situation, and then look for what are the ways that I can get the most out of something. And I think a lot of it will come down when you're looking across people, process, and technology. Technology is often the first place we sometimes go because it seems like a great solution. But if you don't have the people that know how to use it, the people that know how to configure it, if people don't understand how to use it, if people don't understand the context, you talk about having a culture of security, will they do things to bypass it? Well, I'm focused on what I need to do to enable my business and get to market quicker, and that thing was slowing me down. I mean, we've all heard security is the thing that slows down business. So it's really looking at it more holistically and saying, what's the most important? What are the quick wins? And I think those are the ways. And I think lastly, having conversations like this where we're sharing, like we heard the call to action in the last session about reporting. Well, reporting and talking and collaborating and finding a community to learn, I think is also a really important way that you can look at your security and put your money and your time that is going to best serve your organization.
No, that's great. And, the last session also talked about cybersecurity as a team sport, right? And
yeah, exactly.
Everybody coming together. So, that absolutely resonates, really taking the time to evaluate your threats, being aware of them, and having a plan in place to tackle the most important ones, right? Calvin, I want to turn to you. I mean, you serve a SMB customer base. What kind of advice do you give to your customer base on those two questions about the most meaningful steps and how to evaluate those risks?
Yeah, I think Kim highlighted many of the aspects as understanding where you sit, but more importantly, what are your critical assets? Those company crown jewels, and then understanding what those are, and then creating a moat around it and layers of defense to ensure that you're protecting that critical asset, intellectual property, employee data, PII information, whatever it may look like. And often what we're finding is that organizations are certainly just more reactionary. It's like locking the vault door after the heist is already over. We need to take a proactive stance and being prepared for and anticipating threats before they strike. And I think overall, the Canadian SMB market is woefully unprepared. They need to start measuring the risk, looking at it and saying, if I'm going to spend $1 in cybersecurity, where's the best place to spend it? And often I would say it's understanding where your gaps are, having a gap analysis. We talked about people as one of the weakest links. And the thing is people are underinvested in. Underinvested in training, creating that security culture within the organization, running simulations and awareness campaigns to really turn those employees from potential vulnerabilities into the first line of defense. And, that's been true for multiple decades. It is still one of the primary options that we need to explore and continue to invest in.
Yeah.
What I was going to say though is the basics still hold immense value, and so just adopting the things that shouldn't be table stakes, things like multi-factor authentication and creating that additional layer of security, ensuring that we're keeping the software up to date for known vulnerabilities, making sure that we have regular backups just to protect the data, that it's immutable, meaning that it's not sitting in a state that it could be compromised, because often nefarious threat actors are targeting those backups to make you have to pay the ransom because you have no other option. And so making sure they're immutable, meaning they're not in your environment, they can't be compromised if the rest of your network is compromised. So you can lean into that recovery. But I would also say continuing to drive into those risk assessments on a regular basis. The threat landscape is changing, almost week to week. And so doing it once is not enough. It's having that continuous risk assessment And we talked about supply chain. Are you doing those risk assessments across the supply chain of your critical vendors, ensuring that they're doing the right things? Because often we see these chaining attacks where large organizations are being compromised because of a secondary supplier. And if we don't make sure that all those boats are rising to a common standard that's elevating, we leave ourselves open. So I can't stress that enough. It starts with leadership. It starts with leadership playing a pivotal role to ensuring that they have a commitment to cybersecurity within that organization, and it casts down the entire organization. That's what really makes the difference for creating a security conscious organization, because it's not just about technology, it's about that culture, and that culture where security is embedded in every process, decision, and action. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, in a way, when you were speaking, I was thinking, this is also part of upskilling, right? And empowering your employee base to become better at their jobs, right? To contribute more, to help with the security and the growth of your company. So in a way, if you look at it from that perspective, it's really empowering. I want to turn to Autumn now. I mean, you and your company are in a very interesting space where trust, right, is essential to the increased adoption of large language models, generative AI. How are you seeing, this? What do you see as the most important steps that can be taken to ensure that you protect against, perhaps risks that are new, right? But risks that are vital to organizations, and also particularly in your space.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is where we get into the discussion of a lot of what you have to do when you're adopting new technology like this is the same thing you were doing already, just maybe with a slightly different twist, or with kind of updated training. I think from our perspective, the very first place you start is what everyone else has said: focus on the real risks, right? When we think about LLMs, generative AI, being introduced into the landscape, there's kind of three major risks that we focus on. I think first we think a lot about like data leaks and data exposure, and that's one that everybody kind of worries about. And how do you address that? Because it could be a financial risk. More often, it's a reputational risk to your company if something leaks. Another place that we think a lot about is like bias or misinformation, because that just kind of undercuts the value of the system if you're trying to use it. A lot of people, CISOs or other companies I've worked with, think, oh, bias, misinformation, that's not a security problem. But when you think from the perspective of risk, and the whole point of security is to reduce organizational risk, well, bias, misinformation creates a very real reputational risk, or financial, if people are relying on these systems to make decisions in your company. So that's another kind of unique area that I think is pretty common to think about. And then the last thing is just how are you integrating the systems? I think we talked, Fabrice, I think you were talking about how some recent attacks have involved a lot of like the human element, or the fact that we didn't have enough of the human element involved. And the same thing can happen or accelerate as you're adopting AI. Like, how do you gain the advantage of the increased productivity and the more things you can do without humans, but still put people, like, have the right oversight and put people in the processes in the right places. Those are the main risks that we think about when it comes to introducing AI into an organization. And I think that's just the very first place any company starts. But immediately, once you've identified those risks, then people move into, okay, but what do I do about it? And this is where I always recommend, like, everything's a scoping exercise. again, this is true in traditional security as it is, when you introduce AI. Everything's all about, well, okay, somebody's just trying out a little experiment. It doesn't have access to our major data sets. It's scoped down to a small set of people. Maybe it's, we've network isolated it, so it only a few people have access to it, and it's just an experiment. How do you minimize the risk so that particular experiment can go and move forward, and you can figure out if it's going to benefit your company without crushing it under too many controls, too many processes. So you try to scope everything with this idea of what's the actual risk for this particular thing, and then we'll deal with it when you want to scale it up and connect it to our most sensitive internal data sets. We'll talk about it then, but try to empower and enable teams to move without having to cross every security barrier at the beginning. Figure out how you can minimize the risk early on. Another thing that I've had a lot of conversations with companies about is with this shift as we're starting to automate more and more. Once you've scoped things, once you've identified the risks, how do you, are you focused on preventing everything, or are you focused on maybe detecting things? Because sometimes detective controls and seeing like when a system is, acting in an odd way, or it's pulling too much data, or it was granted permissions beyond what would maybe be an appropriate level of risk. Focusing on those detective controls, I think, is sometimes easier to do as an organization, because then you're not focused on like a really brittle, hey, we stopped everybody at the front door. You're focused on watching everywhere and being able to proactively react. So I know a lot of companies are driving towards action with generative AI. You want to see the productivity enhancement where you can ask the LLM to write an email and then actually go send the email for you, or things like that. So the more that we see that drive towards action, the more important things are, like having a healthy SIM in place, and just focusing on those detective controls and the detective monitoring. And then
that's a fantastic perspective, because we talked earlier just a little bit about generative AI. Is it a disruptor, right, or an enabler? And it could be both, but definitely on the enabling side, like you say, right, this behavior and analytics, right, looking out for anomalies, understanding and leveraging LLMs to get greater insight into the actual provenance of these threats, etc., in near real time. Right, and assessing vast amounts of data. All of that can actually be one of our best tools when it comes to cyber defense. So a lot to explore there, but thank you. I'm going to turn to Fabrice now. In terms of, what you've already spoken a little bit about it, but what are some of the meaningful steps that you recommend? And, what kind of advice do you give to companies, to clients, in terms of mitigating the most important risks?
Yeah. So I think, to me, like what's important very often is like what's driving the security program, because like what you're seeing more often than not, especially like in the cloud-based services, customers are going to go like, oh, do you have like a SOC 2 report? Do you have ISO 27001, right? So the driver to do security is not coming from the leadership to be secure. It's more like for compliance to be able to close sales, right? And that approach is flawed because it's going to be a cost control measure, right? If you're saying like, oh, we were going to do SOC 2, you can be sure that every step of the way, they're going to try to go for the cheapest way of achieving SOC 2. So you end up with those companies that are SOC 2 authorized, certified, whatever you want to call it, but they're just doing like the bare minimum, right? So it's not coming from a desire, we want to keep our customer data secure. It's like, no, we just want to close that sales. And it's way too common. And it tends to be the standard. And that's at least, that's still like, it's still better than nothing. Full disclosure, like I'm not saying SOC 2 is not meaningful. At least you're doing something, or you've got some controls. But I would say it's taking you like probably halfway there, maybe a little bit more. But that's for the cloud companies. Now, like if you're talking to more like brick and mortar companies, they don't have those type of certifications that are being asked. So it's going to be harder for them to get that driver. So if the senior leadership is not saying, okay, we need to make sure we keep our customer data secure, they're going to have a really hard time climbing up the hill. I'm actually aware of a local Canadian company. I'm not going to name anyone who got hit by ransomware, and they had one IT person, on-premise servers, on-premise email server, on-premise file share. The only thing that survived when they got hit by ransomware was Slack. Everything else was taken down. And now they've hired a second IT person to do security. So they're still like, oh, we got hit, so thunder is not going to strike twice on the same place, kind of thing, which we know now when we're talking about evolution of cyber attack is not true. Like we're seeing actually now people are getting hit again within months of the first attack. So to me, like the biggest risk first is like making sure like leadership is pushing for security for the right reason, right? And it can't be compliance. It shouldn't be like because you got hit by ransomware. It's really because you want to use it as a marketing tool to your customers, saying, hey, like if you're working with us, your data is going to be secure. Like if you're going to be one of our, if you're going to buy our service and we're going to be one of your supplier, you don't have to worry about supply chain attack. Like everything is solid on our end. So really, like that's where my mindset is like the motivation is going to be the primary driver. If you got the motivation, you're going to invest accordingly to your risk, right? Because you can't just go the cheapest. One thing I would say though, like which is like the middle of the road approach, is you do have to spend tools on you do have to spend money on tools. So you can do the basics like Calvin was mentioning, encryption, 2FA, strong password, all those things. They're doing the basics right, but you still gonna need to invest in some tools. So the advice I would give there is there's a lot of vendors in the security space and a lot of blinking lights. So it can be really easy to end up like with like 15 different tools. My recommendation, and I think where that's why the industry is going more and more, is actually looking for platforms, like services that are going to be able to cover most of your needs. They're not going to be they're not going to be like state of the art. They're not going to be like 100%. But if that platform can get you like 90% there, it's going to be cheaper and more efficient regardless of, instead of getting like 15 different tools, because like all those 15 tools are going to get different system of logs, lot of data. They're not going to talk to each other. So even though like there's a state of the art on that specific field, as far as the complete program goes, they're not going to deliver as much value if risk is integrated like end to end. So my closing point is like have the right motivation and try to keep something coherent for your tools. Don't go down.
No, absolutely. And the other things I take away from your interaction, one, compliance is important, but it's not enough. You can't bolt on security, you have to bake it in. And then linking it to our earlier discussion around software supply chain, ask your suppliers, your vendors, whether or not they're building in security up front, right? Whether or not they're adopting secure software development processes, whether or not they're taking the measures that Autumn, Kim, and Calvin have mentioned, right? Those are really important. So we have a lot of questions actually, and very little time. I'm gonna take one right now, and I think it goes to the core of some of the discussion here. And I'd like to give each of you 20 seconds to answer it. We've talked a lot about the trade-off, right, between security and efficiency or user experience. One, does there really need to be a trade-off? And two, how do we manage it if there is a trade-off? So Kim, 20 seconds to you, and then we'll go along as we have before.
Yeah, so I don't think there has to be a trade-off. I think it's about, and I think it was Calvin that mentioned this in one of his Security is there from the beginning. So if you really look at things, secure by design, then you're not looking at it. It's going to impact user experience because you've come into it. We're doing this together. We're partners in this. So that's in my opinion how you stop the mentality of security is trying to stop business.
Awesome. It's not an either or. Calvin, over to you.
Yeah, I think there's certainly security controls that can be very overtly tedious. And so it's finding that balance to also create opportunities through things like single sign-on, not having 15 different ways to log in, being able to consolidate that down to actually enhance the security or end user experience through security. But also there's lots of technologies that we can layer in that are actually invisible to the end user that monitor in the background so that you have that continuous monitoring. You can see if there's variability and then react to it without fear of user encumberment. So yeah, there's lots of things we can do here.
Yeah, so innovation helping us, not having to make that trade-off. Autumn.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Kim and Calvin said, right? First, like Calvin mentioned, there's a lot of detective controls you can put in place that don't immediately block or stall your business from, experimenting and innovating. So like focus there because you can catch a lot more than you thought you could, and it might get you most of the way there in terms of risk mitigation. And then secondly, what Kim was saying about this needs to be a partnership, like you have like our security teams and our QA teams and all these teams, we need to sit side by side with who's getting blocked, who is experiencing the pain of, I can't do my job, I can't make the company faster, better, grow the market share. Don't treat it like you just must meet our controls as we've defined it, but say, let's come to you and let's partner together, because honestly, we're all here to grow our business together. And so just kind of continue to upskill the security teams to work with the teams that are struggling with how do we do this?
Work as a team, like you said, right? Bring those minds together to tackle, the issue. Great points. Fabrice, 20 seconds.
Yeah, so for me, it's just like always remember that I'm not there to say no. I'm there to facilitate business operations. So if something is not ideal, there's always some controls I can implement. So it can be like, okay, you need to take some risky action, but then I'm going to implement some monitoring or something else, at least to check it's okay, right? I'm just going to close with something. I would say everyone should be adopting passwordless right now. I know MFA has probably been like a big pain point for anyone in any organization, especially like if you have to re-enter your MFA code every 2 hours because you're using Okta or something of the sort. I did do the math on that at GeoComply, and I was like in tens of thousands of dollars in lost productivity of people just entering MFA codes. And with passwordless, you're going like from 20, 30 seconds to 5 seconds. So it's paying on its own. Okta is rolling out. A lot of vendors are doing it now, and say, yeah, like if you want to save your users time and make them like security a bit more, passwordless is the way to go.
Great. Well, listen, it's been a fascinating discussion. We could obviously go on. We've touched on a number of things, from software supply chain to generative AI related risks to prioritizing, the human vector, understanding new technologies, etc. I want to thank everybody for their active participation and hand this back to Ulrike.
Well, I join you in that big thank you, John, and echo your sentiments. And I shouldn't say only notes, but it's for me to really absorb, and hopefully then we all implement this too. But I want to make a few remarks and thank you, everybody. I mean, a personal thank you. I go around my screen. Autumn, thank you so much. Kim, Calvin, Fabrice, everybody brought a different perspective. So we talk about preventative and detective, but also bias as a security risk. I mean, Autumn, a great comment there. AI, language models, supply chains, the human element, human behavior. And John, you mentioned as well, cybersecurity is one of the most pervasive threats. And then I like both sides are innovative. It's not that I like it, but we have defenders and attackers. They're all getting more sophisticated. So how do we catch up? And so again, everybody, I apologize if I didn't capture every comment here and bring it to everybody's attention. You've been all absolutely fantastic, engaged. And that's unfortunately all we have time for, to your point, John. This could go on for a much longer time. But I would like to, the closing remarks, big thank you to the panel, to the moderators of the entire 2 hours we had today, including the chief. Big thank you to Chief Caroline Xavier, who spoke earlier together with David Shipley and covered cybersecurity as a team sport and so many other areas. And another really big thank you goes to the audience. What is an event or a summit without an audience? I think it would really, well, be not too much of an event. And so we've seen also in the chat function, we've seen questions being brought forward, and I'm sure there's a lot they take home, and hopefully more questions and also events will follow. And the Canadian Chamber will make the session available on our YouTube channel, and then a link will be sent via email once it has been released. So thank you, everybody, one more time. Have a wonderful remainder of the day. Stay well, keep safe, and again, thank you once again. And we hope to see you again at one of our upcoming events, either as the audience or participant. Thank you so much.